Ten zakład.
Akože bolo to potom také
Ja, asi ja. Ja, čo?
Okay, we've got some last people coming in. Hello and welcome to the last before summer of our Start with Children mini-series. My name is Petra Marko, I'm the head of the Metropolitan Institute of Bratislava, and I'm delighted to welcome you here to talk about young people today. So I think it's very fitting that the Start with Children series, which is about children and young people and how we should take into account their input in the process of making decisions, in the process of shaping our city, should be the last of the sessions. And I would also like to welcome those of you connecting online. As you know, this is live streamed and there will be space for questions for all of you through Slido later on. Start with Children platform was spearheaded by the mayor of Bratislava, Matt+Fiona, with support of Bloomberg Philanthropies, and our institute has organized 2 large conferences in the last 2 years, bringing together leading voices in urban planning, architecture and city making, exploring how designing cities that truly work for children creates in turn great cities for everyone. This year we continue with a lecture series supported by Nadacia Alliance, Karel Komorek Family Foundation and ITOPS. Thank you very much for your support. And I already mentioned that we're gonna talk about young people today, so I'm delighted to welcome with us Matt and Fiona, a London-based studio, Fiona McDonald's and Matthew Springett, who have got huge amount of experience working with young people in different types of projects, with schools, with developers, with local authorities, with educators. And in the discussion we'll be joined by Venus Jahanpur, who is the head and founder of the Brilliant Stars International School, and by Zuzana Žurkinova, who is our participation expert at the Metropolitan Institute, also involved in our City for Children program. Today we had a little cycle tour with Matt and Fiona, where we had a look at some of the school streets transformations that the Metropolitan Institute has been spearheading in collaboration with the city, and you have seen that the impacts that we're trying to make both in changing the physical shape of the streets and the safety around schools, but we also talked about how we are working with the school children and the communities, engaging them in the process. And that's the psychological transformation, which is really important for us. I should also say that tomorrow we are delighted that Matt and Fiona will be running a workshop with one of the schools who are in our program, and we'll be letting you know about it online, how it went and what the results, what were the outcomes and the process. But now, without further ado, I'd like to ask Matt and Fiona to give us a presentation, and afterwards we'll sit down for a discussion with everyone. So the stage is yours, and a warm welcome to Matt and Fiona.
We're going to do our double act. Let you start.
Thank you so much for having us, first of all. It's a true privilege to be here and to learn so much about the incredible approaches that are being taken here in this wonderful city to ensure that everybody can have a say in shaping their spaces. We're going to focus today on the work that we do and sharing some of what we've learned over the years, particularly in that space of co-design. How can we ensure that young people are not just being consulted, they're not just getting a say, but they're actually getting to see their own ideas fully coming through in the neighbourhoods that they live and play within. We now describe ourselves as youth engagement specialists, but we actually started as an architecture education organisation. And much more fundamentally than that, we started off as 2 friends with a deeply held commitment and curiosity around why are young people's ideas so often not followed through. We had the privilege of working together in an organisation in London called Open City, who do some fantastic work with schools, and Matt was one of the brilliant architects who would volunteer his time to go into schools on a programme that I was running. And so often children were speaking truth to power. They were making really, really important observations. They were bringing fantastic imagination to what they were designing. And they would get a certificate at the end, and then the work would get sadly put away and never became a reality. And we started to have these conversations about why is that? Why are we not taking their incredible ideas seriously and empowering them to genuinely shape the neighbourhoods that they live in? And so that started us thinking, and it's what led us to try to crowdfund a project to see if we could make this a reality. So back in the hot summer of 2016, we desperately searched for somebody who was a custodian of space who wouldn't think that we were mad if we turned up and said, could local young people not only set the brief and design a space for the land that you have, but could they then physically build that space and that become part of the public realm? And fantastically, Sutton House, which is a National Trust property, an Elizabethan house in Hackney in London, said, yep. And we thought they might say, oh, you can do it in a year's time. And they said, we've got a free programme in 2 months' time, can you make this happen? And that's what got us going and enabled us to trial this first project that you can see on the screen, where young people, a group of about 12 young people, designed and built within a single week this amazing entrance, performance and play space in front of Sutton House in Hackney, which is one of London's busiest boroughs. It has a very, very mixed demographic. There are large areas of deprivation, and this was a space that these young people made for all children in Hackney and visitors to London. It stayed open for 2 months, it worked, the children were able to use the tools, children as young as 6 and 7 up to 14, and it really sowed a seed for us of this is possible, so why is it not happening more? And we never set out with the intention of starting an organisation, but I think through that project and seeing I suppose, to the reality of it, that we should continue to follow this path, and that's exactly what we've been doing ever since. We're really pleased that we're going to be 10 years old this year, and we think we're reaching 10,000 young people. And when I say reaching 10,000 young people, that's young people who have not just had their eyes opened to architecture, the built environment, creativity, urban planning, but they've genuinely had a say, and a large proportion of those young people have physically built spaces that they've gone on to use. In the early days when we were doing this, we had some fantastic supporters who we're hugely grateful to, who've continued to advocate for us. But there were people who asked, why? Why should children and young people be involved? They're not yet professionals, they haven't been to university, they don't have those qualifications. Why should they have a say? And I'm sure I'm preaching to the converted in terms of this room. But we were really pleased that during lockdown, Grosvenor, who are a very large landowner and developer in the UK, undertook some research with a lot of 16 to 18-year-olds and found that actually 89% of young people have never been asked what they think about the places where they live, and yet young people are often the ones who are on the forefront of experiencing what those places are like through their play, through their lives, and being very embedded in their neighbourhoods. And actually 82% of children and young people would really like to have a say. So there's a real desire there from children and young people. Alongside that, in the UK, and it may be similar here, the general kind of careers and opening young people's ideas to the possibility of the built environment is really not as progressed as it should be, and so a lot of young people don't know about all of those potential future pathways. So although the work we do is never about encouraging young people to be an urban designer or a planner or an engineer or an architect, we do hope that that is a byproduct potentially of being part of these projects and seeing the huge impact that their ideas can have. Above all though, beyond children and young people, including them in the planning and design and even build processes creates a better built environment. We have, I think for the last 3 or 4 years, on all our projects, we have started to truly try to evaluate the impact and gather evidence about what difference their involvement is making. And on the screen you can see some of our biggest observations. So often people think if we involve young people, that will slow things down, that will make the process longer, that will be an extra hurdle to kind of jump through. And in fact, it couldn't be more different. It often smooths that planning process. It shows that the design teams, that landowners are really wanting to be welcoming and be progressive and open-minded. And so we have never seen a process like this actually slow anything down. It works in parallel, and if anything, can remove some of those barriers. It's an incredible way to ensure social impact. I know we have many incredible head teachers in the room, and we know that young people need more opportunities and more support, and schools and teachers need more support to give young people opportunities. So much gets put on them, and huge social impact can come about from these types of projects, inspiring young people, enabling them to feel a sense of well-being, belonging in that place, and actually completely change the way that they treat or think about their built environment. So actually opposite to, we still have some associations that encouraging young people to use the built environment will lead to antisocial behaviour. In fact, it can be completely, and is completely the opposite. If they feel that they've been listened to, they take far more pride in those places. And finally, it leads to better designed places. We'll touch on this through one case study in particular. But so often it's young people who not only are speaking truth to power, but because they're not yet on the property ladder, they're not yet seeing space, built environment, buildings as property, as something financial. They're seeing it purely as something spatial and places that can be used. They tend to speak truth to power, and they tend to think much more altruistically about accessibility, the built environment being for everybody, and about us caring for the environment. And so these have become kind of fundamental underpinnings to all of the work that we do. I realise this is quite a dense mapping, but essentially it's to say, some of you might be familiar with Weaver stages. I'm not sure if those are used here in terms of different stages of architecture project or built environment project, but showing how from actually the earlier stages of thinking, before any pen has hit paper, any brief has been set, from the very, very earliest stages, young people's ideas can hold value, and there are ways to involve young people, all the way through, of course, the design process, and then very much so through the construction stages, through meanwhile opportunities, and then through the ongoing kind of custodianship of those spaces. And we're very happy, we've got some booklets with us, and we can share this mapping if anyone's interested in that. The type of work that we do broadly sits within Build, Learn and Connect, although of course there's lots of crossover to each of those. These are examples of built projects. So all of these spaces were directly physically fabricated by young people as well as being designed by them. So they include outdoor kind of play and performance spaces, shelters, an outdoor classroom at a school for young people who've been excluded from mainstream school. And these, I suppose, are sort of our North Star of encouraging us to never underestimate what young people are capable of, and several of these projects have gone on to win a variety of awards, including design-related ones. Learn is obviously at the heart of every project, but we're very aware that in every single project, whether or not young people are having the opportunity to build, we really try to think about how we can embed that learning within the curriculum and within the wider soft skill sets that young people might be looking to build. And so we do some projects, some linked to co-design, but some also separated from that are more simply around outreach that support Learn. And then this one that's fundamental to co-design Connect, which is all about really deeply embedding young people's voice in their neighbourhoods, enabling them to have a say. And so often these projects happen through enlightened progressive developers who are really seeing the power of that work, the power of involving young people, the importance of that long-termism that so often these types of projects placemaking projects may be decades in the making. So young people will be those people who are actually the first people to inhabit those spaces, and therefore they really should have a say. So we're now going to briefly talk through 3 case studies.
Thanks, Fee, and yeah, really lovely to kind of hopefully contextualise some of the things that Fee's been saying now with the 3 case studies. And the first is one that picks up on where Fee just left off, on this long-term work. And that long-term work has, I guess, started to emerge with us over the last few years. It's not been that whole 10 years of that journey. And in this case, it's with a landowner and developer called Latimer, and it's part of the UK's largest housing association. So they're the sort of quasi-government, for those who don't know, the sort of quasi-governmental kind of organisations who rent social housing. And in this case, they're now big investors in some of the new towns and new developments that we're doing here. And in this case, we were super privileged to be brought on board to a project which has some very high aspirations in terms of building 7,500 new homes in Colchester, which is, I guess, a city to the east of London. And to do that in a way which was respectful of the existing landscape, had high sort of value and principles in terms of regenerative design, but that was in an area of the UK which they were expecting lots of resistance, particularly with regard to transport and car use. And it was a really, I guess, brave but imaginative decision from the lead from Latimer to see the value of what Fee's talking about, of young people. I think, well, we know anecdotally, but we know more than that now from our research, that they, if asked about the futures of their places and spaces, think about others as much as they do themselves. So the illustration here is an early competition-winning illustration from the team, which indicates the scale of that, but a development that was highly influenced by the work that we did there. And we won that piece of work with Latimer by talking about how, over the long term, you would embed that youth voice into shaping that vision for the future. And the first principle was to, like Fee said, to bring young people's voice to the table alongside adults at the shaping of the brief. So before any design has happened, and to establish, we described it on the left of this diagram, 3 sort of concentric circles of depth. The first one was that we would establish a youth people's forum, young people's forum, who would meet regularly, and we would work with over the long term. So a really deep dive, getting to know those young people, and we'll talk some of that journey in a minute. Then understanding that every young person that was going to be influenced or affected by that, so creating a schools network that we would open up opportunity to hear a much wider voice, and understanding the power of young people as a really powerful conduit. And I think this has come to a realisation to a lot of the partners in this scheme, that the young people's connection to their parents and their network and their carers and the adults in their lives is a really important part of that. And then finally, connecting at certain moments in a lighter touch way throughout the year in this outer ring here. And then setting up engagement programs is a really important part of that journey when you're working and setting up a longer term program, is to spend time, as we did in this case, listening for a long time, learning from them. But also the diagram on the right is an example of that sequencing with a design team. So there's a highly kind of considered choreography of making sure those conversations with those young people are had, where their voices are brought in before design decisions are made, and that there is a choreography, not without slowing down the design team route and journey along the top, making sure that journey is choreographed in such a way where you're feeding all of these depths of streams into that work. And a lot of planning and thinking goes on about that, and that's becoming a sort of an emerging model that even on the shorter projects is really considered up front. So how some of those things might manifest. So that outer ring, the intermediate ring that schools design challenge. So every school in that area, every young person had an opportunity to contribute to that vision, again, before the design was made, to respond to, I guess, a thematic kind of proposition from the developer about how you could think about designing a city with landscape at its heart, with regenerative design principles. And the ideas that came out of that were 250 beautiful ideas of possible futures. And I think there's often historically a resistance because, at least in the UK, a lot of that consultation is done when many decisions, not necessarily young people, with adults, many of those decisions have already been made. And there's often, understandably, resistance and reaction from communities to stuff that's been done. But actually, it's not exposing to us people at the very beginning what that possibility could be, because it really opens up a conversation without any obligation and sort of specific commitment, but it gets a dialogue building. And so we offered that to every school. We did some school workshops, and then that's displayed, and it becomes a framework around which you can talk in an open-ended kind of way, without decisions being made, and truly at the start of a project. And then with those young designers, the forum we meet with monthly, we would we spent 6 months listening to their learning from them about their lived experience. I think this differs depending on whether you're working in space that is existing space that's being reconfigured within an urban context, or in this case, extending an urban context to new land or less understood context. But we spent a lot of time listening to them, listening to how they move through places, through cities, and into the countryside and beyond, and did that in really ways that were playful, joyful always, and then I guess spend a lot of time also helping them develop their confidence after we'd listened to them in developing a kind of a learning about place, taken to see things. Here you can see on the left they were presenting a part of an urban design conference at the Barbican in central London, talking about that journey. So building that confidence. So in the third bubble there, you can see them engaging in design sessions with a fully vetted design team. In this case, they're looking at how play is integrated into the landscape of that scheme. Worth also saying that in this context, and sometimes we are working with young people to think about spaces solely for young people, but in this case, it's spaces for everyone, and see huge value in engaging those young people in that. Young people are often, certainly again, talking through the UK context, are often most excluded from the shared public spaces we have, and find those hardest to navigate. And actually, so their knowledge and ways of navigating and using those spaces, often being some of the hardest, are really brilliant insight into how you might solve some of those problems. Those young designers were at summer schools, and these were really lovely examples where you might take a very specific challenge, and this challenge came from the head of design within the design director within Latimer, who was really getting slightly frustrated with the way in which the design team was thinking about the urban centres of these sort of micro villages that formed the big conurbation. And wanted the designers our designers to sort of shake that up. And we spent 2 or 3 days thinking about what that urban centre could look like, and you'll see in a few slides how it's actually piloted and prototyped in real life. But we thought we talked to them about what that space could feel like, and to them the centre of those new towns those for the village centres were much more park-like, and they weren't bound on all 4 sides. So we made models like that, and then from that distilled some of those design principles into elements that now form part of the formal plans. And then that work with those young designers over that 2-3 year period now have extended to a point where that first phase of the development is in planning application, and this is the pavilion that they have designed. This is a group of, I should have probably said, these guys are 13 to 18. Some of them now are in actually the world of work, but this is a pavilion and the first specific centre that they've completely designed themselves at that scheme. And so proud that work from non-professionals is sitting at the heart of that first phase of that development. And this is, I guess, a pavilion that becomes the gateway. It's called the Gateway Pavilion, but it's the gateway to the new development, but it becomes a sort of precursor to anything. It's a really powerful development in the sense all the civic infrastructure is built and embedded before we build any of the houses. Really proud of that work. It's also really incredible, that advocacy piece. This talks to that forum now acts almost independently of us. champions that vision off of their own back. We were asked right at the beginning of that process about whether or not those young people would be in support of this, and we could never promise that. We're always really clear about that. But what's really powerful now is they, independently of us, are incredible advocates for that future and that change, and I think will be the ones not only who've taught truth to power, but be the ones that are holding them to account. And then very finally on this case study is thinking about Meanwhile as a sort of safe prototype. So out of that summer school, we were looking at what those village centres might be, but on a one-to-one scale. So we looked at them at that big model scale, which you saw there. We also looked at them on a one-to-one scale, and we're given a piece of city centre plot to almost prototype and test that idea of what a soft city centre might look like. You can see here on the left they're making those slides. We work with a local fabricator and maker to facilitate some of those, and then this is at the end. We created this kind of temporary rubble garden that was on a sort of disused site, which is now a prototype, a live, if you like, prototype and pilot for testing and exploring those things. So thinking of Meanwhile as a safe space for exploring more radical ideas about thinking about space.
And worth mentioning that is an opportunity also to partner with many other groups. So this was in partnership with the Beth Chateau Gardens, who developed the concept for the Rubble Garden, and then the young people brought their ideas for how can young people engage more with those types of green spaces through the creation of the furniture there. I will whistle through this one because I'm aware of time, but I think what's really interesting is this is another case study where it's been developer-led by Bywater, who are incredible, much smaller scale developer, much newer developer than Latimer, but who at the very outset have always had environmental credentials at the heart of what they do. So all of their buildings tend to work with different forms of timber construction, but alongside that environmental responsibility, they really see a genuine social responsibility in what they're doing. And actually, to the extent that, and sometimes there can be, and I definitely don't think that's the case in any of the projects we're showing, but there can be a case of our young people purely being involved pre-planning as part of that kind of communication and building support for a scheme. And no criticism for anybody who is looking to do that, because of course you should be building support with communities. But what's really fascinating and worth applauding with Bywater is they've completely decoupled this work from anything to do with planning and see it as just something that should happen in terms of good placemaking. We started a relationship with Bywater about 3 or 4 years ago now, where actually they'd already received planning permission to create this, it's actually office space, shared kind of office space. But they were very aware that it overlooks this park, which is very used by a local secondary school, which hasn't got any outdoor space of its own, and realised that although the internal space wasn't going to be used by young people, that building was going to have a huge impact on that park, and therefore young people should have a say. So we supported them to invite those local school children in to actually design the facade of that building and design those ceramic tiles. And it was a multi-year project, of course. We worked with a group when they were in year 7, which is the first year of secondary school in the UK. And then through a series of workshops, they designed these tiles that the design team were fantastic and really ran with at Field and Cloak Bradley. And then 2 years later, almost in disbelief, we took those now teenagers on site, say, here are your tiles. And they almost couldn't believe it, that we had followed through and made sure that that had happened. And that's true hats off to that developer, Bywater. Beyond that, they now see outreach and enabling young people to learn about their built environment as crucial to every project they do. So these are just 3 examples, both a mixture of housing and office, where they're often retrofitting existing spaces rather than demolishing, or if they are building from scratch, then using sustainable materials and fabrication methods. But on each one, we've worked with them to think about what are the key themes, the key kind of curriculum-linked subjects that are coming up in that particular building, and how can we make sure that young people know about what's happening in their local area, but also that can become a kind of democratic piece of education, seeing site as classroom in a very literal sense. And so across those 3 projects so far, we've explored ideas of neighbourhood kind of master planning on a housing scheme in Kingston. And of course, some of those ideas will feed into the vision for what that housing should include beyond the four walls of individual units. Into these incredible kind of public realm spaces that include play, edible growing, and green landscapes. On another project that has been very much about retrofit, it involved taking the young people on site. It's a building site right next to their school, and actually that seems like such a small thing that actually becomes a really big act of kind of democracy to say to those children, this noisy site that's been impacting you, come and see, come and learn about what's actually happening behind that hoarding, why the cranes are there, and then learn about the kind of the construction processes, the way the facade, the structure is being kept, but a new facade is being built on the upper floors and created this incredible kind of new roofscape. And finally, most recently, a project that they're undertaking in Manchester, which is again about retrofit, about learning about how important it is to keep existing materials, not to demolish, to reuse as much as possible, teaching them about carbon, embodied carbon within those materials, and the importance therefore of keeping that structure and selecting those materials really carefully. And some of these things are what really good schools are already doing, but are not things that are necessarily flagged in the current school curriculum. So learning about, in the UK at least, learning about sustainability can be very much about what can one individual do, rather than teaching people about what they should expect from those organisations, those professions, those bodies who are shaping the built environment, which has, of course, such a huge impact on the environment. So that's a very different and sort of a tangent to co-design, and as the final case study, we're going to land back into hopefully a wonderful example of co-design and co-build.
Thanks, Lee. So this is a project. Sorry, go back. This is a project which started 3 years ago and was came about through a hiatus in a large piece of sort of national infrastructure. So HS2 is the high-speed rail that will link sort of southern and northern England. We tend not to do big infrastructure projects very well in the UK, and it's over budget, it's over time, and has not really, throughout its route, has not really engaged hugely well with the community early on, and they acknowledged that, but very realised that when there was a moment of pause within that project, while we had a shift in government, there was an opportunity to maybe make good some of those things and to re-engage with the community in a really particular way that would mend some of those bridges in that context, but also build opportunity for the community. In this case, we were asked to work with the local community in the centre of London in a meanwhile site that was opened up by that pause, and to think about how that space would be used best by young people with a completely open-ended brief. And we did that, as we often do, by soliciting responses from like we did, I showed you in the previous one, with a much wider range of inquiries into that. You can see on the left-hand side here, for early stages of that co-design, which might involve up to many hundred young people contributing to what that space could be. And the overarching kind of response was a space for play, but in play in a way that was not a usual playground, of which they had quite a few in the local neighbourhood. Play as performance, and play as a sort of embedded within a landscape, and you can see those ideas emerging here. And then over a period of time, those ideas are distilled through that learning journey, as we've said. So we worked with we plugged into a series of community events. We then established and worked with a local group there that has an existing relationship, and I think that's something really worth saying, that in many cases we're working peripatetically. We're travelling all over the UK and further afield to do projects, and in that context we have the privilege of working with really amazing local partners, and we're doing a project obviously tomorrow with a local school and with students that are architecture students based in Bratislava, so understanding that we can bring hopefully something new to a situation, but working collaboratively and collegiately. So working with then a youth group who took those initial ideas from the wider community about this idea of play and performance, and we took them on that learning journey, often again part of that learning journey is not in a formal context. It's taking them to see new things, even if they're just maybe 5-10 minutes away from their neighbourhood. Often, again, in the London context, particularly in big urban cities in the UK, groups of young people, particularly in areas of sort of maybe higher socio-economic sort of challenge, you will find young people not moving particularly far from their neighbourhoods. So left or right hand side here you can see really lovely images of them visiting examples of other sort of play spaces which were quite radically different. And then we always find part of that learning journey, that co-design journey, we know some of the materiality we'll be building with, the way in which we want to construct, and this is a project where they actually live built this park. We will work with analogue models and materials that facilitate that kind of design thinking, and you can see the emergence here of this idea of space and to gather, space as performance, but also this idea of reflection came in as a really potent part of bringing an audience into a performance, and those ideas emerge backwards and forwards at scale through different sessions. And then we nearly always, so I guess this case study is taking it a little bit into the process. We will often then play back those emerging ideas at scale, and this is what we would call a proto-build. So it's developing those things that have emerged as a desktop model into becoming something maybe half scale. In this case, they're exploring that idea of reflection, of how those things will actually tangibly become real, and taking those through those step journeys is a really important part of giving that agency, and also building their ownership in that design process. And so the emergent design that came through that very direct design process, that was a sort of a dozen, I guess, engagements those young people over a 3-month period, ended with us building all of these sort of panelized elements of that structure and that park in a summer school. Here you can see them building every single sort of part of those frames, which were then installed on site. This is early in the winter, and then it became this kind of really beautiful space that was at the heart of that community, was active as a play destination. And I guess the really important part of this journey is that giving back was not only a giving back and building a bridge with that community in terms of making this space, which was always going to be a temporary meanwhile space, but was thinking and knowing that all of the trees, all of the infrastructure, all of the wood and materials that we've used here would then have another second life actually within their neighbourhood. And then this summer, so there was a sort of, it had a 1.5 year life. Those things then were taken away, that's gone back to being developed now as the terminus for this large rail infrastructure. But all of those components are now being redesigned and reconfigured by those young people through a series of workshops to become public realm furniture that will integrate play and performance, I guess, within the public realm. And so we work with them with scale models again. It's the same children and young people that were involved in the first process. They knew this was coming, but I think it was their sort of surprise when we re-engaged and we came with the scale model pieces from their build, and they spent 2 or 3 days with us in a really active session of reconfiguring those to a position where we did the small scale work that gets scaled up to the proto builds where they're exploring seating with play, with again the reflective elements in that, and then embedding those pieces within 5 spaces within the estate. And that's getting built this summer and will be there as a sort of a permanent kind of very similar to what we've taught today. These are all islands that were very heavy trafficked areas, so their areas, it's part of a wider traffic calming strategy within the neighbourhood, but embedding young people's design ideas in the heart of that. And again, worth saying, on both of these we've worked very closely with, first time with HS2, who were really proud of them making that commitment to this, and the second time round with the local authority, seeing the value of that youth engagement being front and centre and working closely in both cases with LDA Design, who have wholeheartedly brought youth voice into shaping not only their bits but also the wider landscape. So I think that's about it for the 3 case studies. Hopefully we're going to have a conversation now, just within time, I think, but hopefully that was good. And yeah, thank you very much.
Fantastic, thank you very much. I'd like to invite our co-panelists, please, to take a seat as well. I need to see the questions on the Slido later on, so I'm taking the corner. Thank you so much for a very inspiring presentation. Throughout it, I was thinking about one topic, and it's a really big topic for all of us here, and it's young people and the fear about the future and what's happening in the world. And I'd like to maybe open up with this very big question and perhaps start with Venus. You're running a school for quite a few decades here in Bratislava, which besides the academic curriculum has a big focus on responsibility towards environment and character building. Why have you felt strongly about it, and why do you feel that gives young people a better chance at addressing the future? Because a lot of Matt and Fiona's work is actually, I feel, is very much about that sense of agency about the future, like, really being involved and being part of the decision making. And how are you finding it, having been doing it for a few decades here in a very different context in terms of being in Central Europe, post-communist city, and how has it been, and how do the parents perceive it? Obviously. Yes, please. It's on.
Thank you so much for asking me to be here. I think our focus is how to help children to develop qualities that we may need to be good human beings. Foremost, in any school, we try to think of intellectual development, but I think also every parent and ultimately every school is also thinking about developing their characters. So we need both. And then in doing that, and of course at the same time, I think it goes without saying that we all care for environment and thinking about the future. So it's always about how do we do that within the context of the school. Then comes the idea that one of the ways of doing that is involving them in shaping their neighborhoods and their environment. So for me, foremost is, I know we're sitting with the architects, but foremost is thinking about what will this teach the child, and this engagement. The outcome is always good because the environment comes for the spaces surrounding the school, and of course it's very important for nature. Ecology, yeah, but then as they are trying to engage to see how they can make this space better, this environment, they start thinking about why do I care? What is it there to care? Who are my neighbors? Who are these people? And this is something we want to develop in them, this idea that my development is not only for myself, but for contributing to the betterment of society.
Sense of consciousness, I suppose.
Being very conscious and having this idea always in their mind that how can I develop, how can I contribute to the well-being of society? Now, for example, one wonderful way is to engage them, and then, for example, in projects that we did also with the city, was that going outside with the students and trying to ask the neighbors, before we do show them, we go outside our school. The stories like this, that we started planting a lot of things in our school, and then gradually there was no more space in the school. We had planted a lot of trees and other things, and we didn't even ask the city. We didn't know we have to ask the city. That's the advantage of being a foreigner. So then when it was full, we started asking the local, authorities and outside, the city ultimately, eventually, to see, okay, we want to plan more, and where can we go? And this started a whole process that we started learning. Of course, former communist country maybe, or anywhere, I think is the idea is we probably can't. Being a foreigner is good there because you don't know the can't, okay. Also a bit of rebellious. So you just go out and start doing it, but gradually you learn actually how to do it, who to approach. I think I think most people are here Slovaks. I think it's actually quite wonderful in Slovakia that you can. I find the city very approachable, but the local city, and now with the magistrat, the city council, that we can ask them and we can ask these questions. And yes, it's a process, but eventually, we started getting responses that we can go outside and we can start planting. It started with smaller spots and gradually bigger spaces around the school and planting with them. But we always ask these questions, ask the children. We call it outreach. Let's go outside and ask the neighbors. And and they also learn to ask other neighbors, how do you use this space? Asking the mothers, asking old people, trying to observe and having a discussion among themselves. So because that idea of that they care about other people. They would say, I don't know my neighbor, I never talk to my neighbor, we don't know who they are, and which I think is common for many people. And learning this, going outside and starting doing that. And that I think is important that they start caring for others.
I mean, it's what I think sort of links to what Matt and Fiona were saying about the kids who, from more deprived backgrounds, who've never sort of went out into some other parts of the city or their neighborhood, and this kind of connection and reaching out. And Susanna, I wanted to ask you, because you're part of our City for Children program and our participation team, where we're working with over 30 primary schools by now as an institute on improving the areas around schools, safety, but importantly also it's about getting the children involved. So from the experience at the different schools, have you seen that realization of the children sort of reaching out, as Venus said, and realizing, that they can have an impact, and that they can get to know their neighborhood, and how observing the children, how has it changed the way they feel about that, their school, their community, school community?
The thing is that we visit the schools just a couple of times, so unfortunately we don't see the long-term effects. But I would say we work with the map, and when they see their neighborhood from the bird's eye perspective, it's so fascinating for them to see it and to understand where they are, and to connect the dots. And I think they just see, I think that's the map exercise is very good for this. But if I could, I would detour a bit for the future question for the young people, because that's what we do with participating with young people now in a project. We had the opportunity to partner with a civic organization, Youth Watch, and they do this method. It's called Futures Literacy, and it's considered like a very crucial skill for young people to have in the future. It's about imagining futures. Since we don't know what the future holds, like none of us truly know, so we have the opportunity to imagine it as we wish, and also to maybe have a sense of agency. Maybe we can affect it, each of us, in some maybe small way, but we can. So this is what we learned to do, and now we had a couple of workshops with the Futures Literacy method. So I think it's really important to talk to young people about the future, because yes, they're uncertain. I'm anxious too.
Yeah. And Matt and Fiona, have you seen in the work with the kids that really very different scales? I mean, the long-term planning with the Colchester project, how you make it tangible now, and how do you kind of make that realization that actually they're influencing the design process, because you showed the loops of how it all feeds into the design process, but it takes quite a long time to realize that project. So the meanwhile comes into it, but perhaps also thinking about this sort of the fear of the future and young people, and how your work affects their sense of having some, not control, but having a say over it. last one.
That's better, sorry. I think if we're completely honest, some of that long-term work we're not certain of yet, but the proof will be coming in the next kind of few years. And I think that point of that forum, those young people, as I sort of said there, I think we as much as they will be keeping our eyes on that to make sure those things that they've said and have gone into those planning applications that have formed those design codes, the proof will be in the pudding on those bigger, longer term projects. But our sense is that those partners, and we're careful about the partners we're working with, are the ones that will be doing that, but that does need that longer term. The work in the place where we're seeing those come to fruition more quickly, the smaller pieces, like, well, not the smaller in terms of big project, but the HS2 work, that we are seeing. We're seeing very directly that tangibility and the power of that work to bring communities together in the sense that it gives them agency, and maybe just touching on that futures, and maybe Fee wants to talk about future sort of possibilities, and that's a really powerful part of what we do. But I do think the power of youth kind of work and youth voice, when it's manifest in models or made things, we're always really surprised by when we, at the end of a project or an end of a session, when those works are often celebrated publicly, they are moments when those parents, those carers, that community come together to share that, and that becomes a glue, a cohesion, and a moment of sort of community celebration, and that's a really powerful thing in its own right.
I'd just add that we definitely, when we go into classrooms, there's a different atmosphere. It's not always a given that people are overjoyed that we're there straight away. Sometimes communities have been over-consulted. They've been asked a lot, what do you want? And they haven't seen anything tangible yet arrive. And in time frame of a child, 6 months is forever. Like, a year is just impossible. And to think about 10 years, that's just never going to happen. So we work really closely with partners in thinking about what can we tangibly give back. It's important that young people, their views are going to influence what's happening in 10, 20 years, but we have to make sure that there's something tangible made now, and that's where the Meanwhile projects become really important, or those build moments where they are actually getting to see, it might only be the scale of play or a bench, but they're seeing something, they're seeing their ideas that were in their imagination become real, and that they have actually got that agency. And we definitely see a shift in how they relate to us and to the other partners when that starts to happen. The first time that they're handed a drill or handed a saw, and there's this moment of, really, are you really giving me this responsibility? And saying yes. And I think children are no different to adults in when we feel like we're in a box, we haven't got a say, and we're never going to have a say. That's when some of those fears can really build up, because there's that kind of passive disempowerment and sense of hopelessness in a way. And taking that first step of saying to a young person, the future is completely unknown. We can't promise you that we're going to be able to fix everything, but what we can do is start to give you the skills and the tools so that you have agency, that if you get a bright idea and you think, hang on, why are we not doing this? You can run with it, and it doesn't get put back in that filing cabinet, which was our experience early on. And that's no disrespect to any of those organisations who were doing that outreach early on, because often that wasn't even happening, but making sure that it's followed through and that it is tangible.
It's really interesting from the body of work that you showed, and you've been doing it for 10 years, and both of you are architects by background, and actually you are able to switch full-time to dedicate yourselves to the work with young people, and it's interesting to see how really big clients and housing associations, developers are really tuning in and listening to what young people have to say, and that's at least from what you described, it seems that it's a genuine process which can actually impact, make really big impact, positive impact on the long term, how that community forms, because now it's really important, I think, for in new developments also in Bratislava that actually there are not just new projects, but that there are communities and that they are integrated within the wider context. And also the work that you're doing at Brilliant Stars is about this outreach and getting to know the neighbors and being aware that, you know, we are here in this inner block of Petržalka housing estate, but there's a senior home, there's a shop, there's all these other communities. What are the topics, I'd ask all of you that, also because Susanna is also one of the mentors for our Tuba Youth program, so we have engaged sort of young people from the age of 15 to 30 in this program, which is affiliated to this new architecture center. What are the big topics that the children, the primary school children, and you know the young people from 15 to 30, and from your experience, that are mostly on their mind? You know, what are the big, let's say, fears or challenges or topics that they are interested in?
You know, I also have very young children, from 3 to 15. I work with older youth too, but I think, I mean, all of us who have younger children, you know, they are very excited and they believe everything is possible. So for a 5, 6, 7-year-old, everything is possible. We were also the same. And so for me, is also very, by the way, they also hear the news, they hear us, and of course we need to talk to them about climate change and about everything that's happening. So you definitely have heard discussions about like, oh, maybe we shouldn't say so much because then they become burdened and so on. But my experience, we do talk a lot about this topic in every class and so on. My experience is that smaller children, of course, they're very concerned and they should be concerned. But the moment they given some tools and they are asked, what do you think we can be doing? And then they learn together with their teachers, together with adults and their families, then they need to do something. And this is very important, and this is what maybe long-term has not happened in the schools overall, not just in this regard. And so then, you know, the children want to do it, and the adults say maybe later, maybe not now, and so on. Gradually, they become cynical, that it is not possible. So for me, running a school in kindergarten, it's so important. Of course, even many times, even my staff want to say like, okay, maybe it's enough now. But it's always important that if the child has come up with a suggestion, or an idea, and of course you do 2 things, they want to do 5 other things. They get more excited, but then it needs to happen. We need to do it, because otherwise they lose this hope. So they do have hope, but they can become easily hopeless, like a lot of adults, you know. So that's super, super important, and I think it's also a role of the school that implement. And the other aspect is that we are also, all of us have learned to go to school, learn something, but we really don't do anything about this, and then we wonder why we're even learning that, and so on. And that's also long term, like make learning meaningless, whereas it shouldn't be like this in normal, you know, healthy, good school or any education, is that we learn something and we immediately try to implement. So for me, it's like finding small ways of implementing. These are all ways are also implementing, doing something immediate surrounding or any school or environment, and inside the school, by the way. So this is important that we do something about that. And the topic is it doable? Can we do it? And then they want to do it. And then they're very happy. They're very joyful and happy. They know the war is happening in Ukraine. They know these things are happening, but I'm doing something. And then there we go. We have taken care of mental health too. That they are joyful, happy beings.
Zuzana, can you tell us, I mean, our Tuba Youth young people have several topics that they've identified, and they're working on them in more detail here in this space, and they engage people. What are the topics, and how does it empower them to, you know, organizing the events and discussions?
So we had 4 workshops with 60 people from the age of 15 to 30, and so these are all the topics that we gathered, or they were the most popular ones. So usually it was about climate change, mobility, affordable/community housing, and also any kind of community building activities. And out of all these topics, they selected 3 that they now actually organize events on. So it was arts in public space, in the affordable housing I mentioned, and then there's the last one is like a community initiative for anyone who wants to join, and the topic of the event always changes, so it's really fluid. So it was, but I think it was a bit skewed because we were the ones, Metropolitan Institute was the organizer, so I think the scope of the themes that people were interested in, like the participants of the workshops were interested in, were already a bit limited. But yes, I think these were
the people gravitating towards applying to be part of this program were already interested in the city-making topics and housing and neighborhood building and so on. Yes. Yeah, and in a way, like we wanted to match that with the people who might be interested, because it kind of makes sense for us as an institute who's concerned with the built environment. Yeah.
Just to say though, those topics are exactly the same topics that come up with young people in the UK, worries about where they're going to be able to afford to live, what jobs are going to be available to them, how to get around. I think one of the challenges maybe we've had is that often we're working with partners or developers who are in control of a lot of things and can make lots of things happen, but it's almost the next level above that kind of governmental decisions. So for example, we're young people, mobility is so important to them, particularly in more rural communities, and that can always be a sort of a tricky point for developers anyway, who are trying to develop low car neighbourhoods, encourage people towards public transport, but often the public transport that then gets put forward for young people, they have a similar reaction to it as many adults would. So buses are seen as being unreliable, that they're not going to turn up on time, that they would prefer to see trains and trams, but often that's beyond the scope necessarily of what the developer can do. So it sort of sets our ambition, the task to us is kind of how can we bring those others to the table who actually could implement some of these decisions that are sort of the next stage up. But absolutely so much synergy, and a huge topic in the UK that's just happening this week, of course, is that we're going to have a ban on social media. I'm not sure if that's similar here, but we've just proposed to introduce that, I think, in
till the age of 16.
From the age of 16, and a lot of people like Dinah Bornat, who I know has spoken at the summit before, are really making the point, why are we presenting everything to young people as if we're closing their opportunities down? Why are we not incentivising them to get out of their phone and their small screen and saying to them, you are welcome in the built environment, this garden is for you, this park is for you, this youth space is for you, you don't need to transact money to be in this space, there are toilets for you, there are lots of activities to do, it's a safe space, it's a programme space. Why are we not taking the carrot approach? Why are we just using the stick? And I think it really sets the kind of gauntlet for, or not the gauntlet, that's the wrong word, it sets the challenge to organisations like us for how can we really support them to really advocate for what they need and enable those who are in positions of power to change these things to actually make that change happen.
There you open a very big topic with the screens, and this was also a topic in last year's summit, which, yes, it's really huge and really important conversation, and it will be interesting to see how in the UK this social media ban until the age of 16, I saw it on the news, and that they were just, randomly asking people on the street, and a lot of people are supporting it, but then some people are like, oh, well, you should be telling them what to do and what not to do. And then, of course, people will be going around it. Some people will and some people won't. So it will be interesting to see how, I think also in Australia they are implementing it. So I believe we have some questions already on Slido, and there's the hashtag if you want to ask them. You can also ask question in analog, and I very much like that. But because we also are live streaming, this is also for our online participants. So bear with me while I try to see these questions from my lateral position here. So do you observe during your career that the interest of young people in being involved in these kind of projects is decreasing or increasing? I think that could be a question for everyone, but maybe let's start with Venus, because you've been running the school for over 30 years, and it has been a very different Bratislava 30 years ago, and very different children. But children are children. So I mean, is there a difference?
I think if we start early, they're interested. If we miss that opportunity, like 12 to 15, and we start later, then we see more of this. That I'm not sure, and they become more self-conscious. But I don't know, that I think then it takes a little bit more to engage them. But starting early, they all want to have a hand in it, and so we need to kind of be early. That's how I see it.
In the schools, in the City for Children program, do you feel that, because we've had one pilot school and we had the 10 schools with UNICEF support, and now we have an application-based program where the schools apply themselves, they have to get support of the parents, the district mayor, the parents, the school board and the school teachers. So do you feel like there's this switch from selecting the schools ourselves based on data to saying to schools, apply if you really want to have this engagement, has made a difference in how the children engage? Because the children at that stage.
I wouldn't say so. No, I don't see a difference. But I wouldn't say I have no data for this. But hypothetically, I think it could work like this when we. That's our goal actually with the Tuba youth group in engaging young people, is that it will snowball. Like if a friend tells you this was a cool workshop, they listened, it was fun, they were cool, then we hope that it will spread, like people will be more willing to come. And as all of you said, it's important that things happen and that they realized afterwards.
I think from the perspective of young people, I think you're right with the slightly older young people, the youth maybe, and teenagers. It takes a little while to build that trust. And I think once that trust is there, the fundamental desire to kind of, the reward that comes from working collaboratively, collegiately, and with your hands is something that seems universal, that people thrive when they get exposed to it. I think we in the UK, our education system's taken a lot of that out of our learning, and so we've unlearnt it, and so it's new, and it's a bit of a. But I think fundamentally it exists, probably exists in us even as adults. I mean, I think when we do our projects, there's an amazing way in which people come together, and I think probably when I grew up, that was part of my curriculum. That was, we learnt through doing and making, and we were. The curriculum was delivered in such a way where there was lots of open-endedness, and I think as long as you have that time and space for those slightly older young people, you can build that, and it's there as, to answer that question, it's there as strongly as it ever has been.
If we can keep with you, because the next question really I think is for you. Can you recall a moment when young people completely changed your perspective on a space through their ideas or input? And you showed us a lot of examples of what they've come up with, these play spaces and dance and...
One in particular that springs to mind was one of our first projects, which was working with young people, was a pupil referral unit, so young people excluded from mainstream school, where both the Enlightened Council and the very Enlightened Learning team at Hull City of Culture, who were taking Hull through the City of Culture preparations, recognised that each school needed to be engaged within its own way that fitted the terms of that school, and so this particular school were given an allotment, and the young people could see that as their own space, and we were asked, could we support those young people to replace their shed? And I think coming from architecture backgrounds, we perhaps both had a slightly romantic ideal of, we were imagining kind of rural studio type, when they use reclaimed materials, it will have that sort of slight patchwork but very charming kind of feel to it. And these young people were having none of that. They never even had a bedroom of their own. Some of them didn't even have homes of their own. This was their first opportunity to put their mark on the world, and in there it's really stuck with me. It was 9 years ago now, but being sat in a room with them when they're making these models, they said it's got to be slick and it's got to be cool. It's representing us. It's who we are. We're not interested in this sort of weird aesthetic that you're coming up with. It's this, and recognizing that was a real lesson from the start of not to go in with preconceived ideas. We might have ideas that are there, and hopefully we can help be a springboard. So there isn't that fear of a blank canvas, but always to go in with eyes open. Just to go back to the question before, I would say in the UK, and I'm not sure if it's similar here, but we have a massive branding issue with the built environment. So how we market that to teenagers is really tough. The term architecture is too exclusive and feels too intellectual and off-putting. The term built environment sounds really boring and dull. And we have really struggled to find a way to actually sum up what is this? It's about the places that you inhabit. But if anyone's got any answers to that, or I'd be fascinated to know how it's framed within your language, whether actually you think it's perceived quite differently by teenagers. But that is a challenge to us. Once we get into what it is, they're super excited about it, but that initial kind of elevator pitch is a tough one.
Everything. That was the thing I knew you were going to say. But there was one moment a couple of years ago on a project where we were focusing on transport in a new development, and they had the transport consultant come in. And they were telling the young people about the rapid transit system, which was a bus, but it was going to be zero car in phase 2, and there was going to be mobility scooters for everyone, all the old people, young people, and some of the young people said, but you can't use those until you're 16, and you need a credit card to use those, and you need a phone, and I don't have a phone. And it was like you just saw for that moment the penny dropped in this person that had been thinking about this process probably for years, had not fundamentally, or missed one of these fundamental kind of moments in that jigsaw. And I think that's also why it's really important to.
It's the city bikes as well. I mean, this is a real issue.
Yeah.
Like kids and young people very often can't use them because you
it was a moment that then I remember the design director going, oh. And it was like that completely unlocked that strategy, and now there is a solution, or they're developing that solution.
Yeah. Let's segue, because the mobility is something that's very much one of your core topics, Venus.
Yeah.
So you do a lot of outreach and education about mobility. So I'd like to open up this question about behavior change and starting with children. We can talk about City for Children as well, but let's start with you and your school. How do you feel that the school environment and the way that the conversations that are had there, how are they influencing the children and their thinking about mobility? Because the mobility was mentioned a couple of times already, and it always is one of these big topics. How do you get it right? How do you get more active mobility? How do you, if you can't put trams, metro, etc., is bus going to do it, bikes, etc.
We are an international school, so it means people come from all over the town to our place, so not everyone is from that local area. So then this question of children had been doing surveys to figure out who's coming by bus and not, and so on. And for 1 or 2 years we kept doing these surveys to figure out how the situation is. So they were collecting data, and then we were deciding, okay, how can we improve on this so that more people can come by bike and bicycle. And in every class, like, there were discussions with their teachers, and then actually we have a eco-collegium, a group of students and some parents who meet together once or twice a month, and so they had this bold idea that, okay, let's go car-free the whole week, and so on. And then I was a bit surprised, because sometimes the same child says to parents, like, please, let's go by car instead of coming by bike. Some parents are telling me. Anyway, so they come up with this idea, and then they started thinking, what can we do? And then we looked at the map of the city, and they found routes in the city that different parents could locate themselves, and teachers and some older students were involved here. Teenagers were going on these spots, and then on that day they would all come by their bikes, you know, from at least certain areas or completely
It
from
was the
home.
bike bus ride.
Bike bus ride, yeah, we had seen, I think, the idea also in England, they told me afterwards that had been done, so we were doing it, and we had no idea. Conversation I had with the children, because they were coming, you know, from Záhořské or Stupava or other places, and they came up with creative ideas of, you know, my mom can, they always volunteer, their moms. My mom with them, my dad can be there, and then other children can come with the bus and so on. And then I was just making smoothie and sandwich for everyone as they were coming. I thought, like, you know, but I had no idea how it would go. But it was interesting to see that all of them, many would say, because days before we would talk to each other, many would say that it's, you know, it's too far, it will take us 2 hours, it's not doable. And as they were coming, you saw me, and I was handing out smoothie. I said, like, how was it? Oh, it was a lot better. It wasn't that bad. And this was, nearly everyone said that, and it was so enjoyable, and they wanted to do it again.
And the joy of it and doing it together, and I think that's...
Yeah, and all children say actually it was the best day of their life, and so on to their families, and families even going by bike on Saturday for, 4-year-old 3 times went 1 hour in the morning, 1 hour in the afternoon to see if it's doable. So then it became better, and even we tested. So ideas
it
are
becomes
tested.
possible, and I think it's really hard for individuals to make that decision, like, oh, this morning I'm gonna make this big effort to completely change around my movement patterns and the way that I bring my child to school. But if you do it together,
It was fun.
it's really inspiring, and we've had quite a lot of success. We're very proud of our walking buses. So Zuzana, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about the walking buses, because the cycling infrastructure isn't everywhere yet so developed, but we've had a lot of success getting kids to walk to school in groups, and it's a similar principle.
So at some schools we had a walking bus, which means that parents drop off their kids at the stops, and then a responsible adult walks them towards the school. And the kids were so happy. I mean, it was fun. It made it so much fun to know, you know, to just walk with the group. They also had music, which makes it even more fun, I think. So I think exactly as you said, it becomes possible, and the kids feel more independent, maybe, and so the ideal state would be that the kids ask their parents to let them use the walking bus, or to maybe join a friend, which is not so common now, as we found out. I think it was more common in the past to join your neighbor and just to walk together to school. So yes, it was a huge success.
Apparently, even some children were getting out of cars to join the walking bus, seeing their friends and their classmates. So I think this is a really important point for us, because I think in the society there's so much fear now. The parents, you know, there's more fear. I read one statistics that a stay-at-home mom in the United States in the 1950s spent less hours per week with her child than working mothers in the States today. So the pressure on parents in terms of, making sure that the children are going into the activities, and that they're spending time with them, and that they're doing homework with them, and all of these things. Whereas in the 50s, like, the stay-at-home moms in the suburbs would be just, making cake and drinking coffee together, and let the kids go out and won't see them all day. But I'm veering off a little bit, because there was one more question which I'm not forgetting about. I was reminded we should take all the questions, and all of them will be answered. And this is coming back to Matt and Fiona, because it's about, you're both coming from an architecture background, and the question is about what needs to change in architecture education for collaboration with young people to become a standard part of designing spaces and designing practice. And it's also interesting because we know our audience here at Tuba, that today we have less architects in the audience, and we have more people from communications, participation, education. Of course, it's natural, but our goal is to get more architects also interested in these crossovers, because we feel that the spatial practice needs to be connected with the social and the people, the users that it's for. So what? How do you feel that British architecture education? I mean, it's like really generalizing it. There are different architecture schools, but how are they faring on these topics? And
it's a huge question, and firstly, Matt can talk much more to architecture education, having kind of taught at UCL in the UK for nearly 30 years. Speaking to the practice part, I mean, we've worked with some incredible design teams. We've never had to, even if it's been an arranged marriage in the sense that a developer or a commissioning partner has brought us on board and said we would like you to partner with the design team. We've never had a design team push back. If anything, they've said we want to come to more workshops, we want to hear more about what the young people are doing. I would say there's possibly a kind of, I haven't worked as a practicing architect, but an outside observation is that some of the procurement methods and some of the types of contracts we have, I've definitely heard from years ago when I was running a schools programme for the Royal Institute of British Architects in the UK, a lot of practices would approach because they were saying that all of the contracts they had were design and build ones where they were contracted to a contractor and they never had any contact even with the head teacher in a school that they were working on, let alone a teacher, and definitely not a child. So they were designing these schools in an absolute vacuum because they had no contractual relationship with the school whatsoever. So I think there's something that's almost a higher tier to the practices themselves of how they can operate, which is definitely an issue, and definitely I don't think there's resistance from practices. I would say that their time is more and more squeezed, and I think really reiterating the point that if anything, this can make processes easier because you learn so much from the young people. It can give you a compass, it can give you a clear direction, it can avoid pitfalls, making sure that message comes through loudly rather than this is going to be another burden on your time. And we make very clear that all of those logistics, all of those worries about how to engage with children, safeguarding the logistics, we can take all of that off them so that they can genuinely just be eyes and ears to listening to the young people's responses is probably a really important part of that. But coming to architecture education, I think, Matt, you're better, and probably from practice perspective, better place to answer.
I think it's something we reflect on a lot, and probably a really too big a question to sort of answer in a sentence. But I think the nature of kind of architecture education in the UK, and probably in most Western kind of models, is not really. We were reflecting actually on the coming today that actually, as a vocational profession, training at university level to do a particular job, in the UK at least, and I'll talk to that context, most of our architecture education isn't preparing us vocationally to do that job. So there's that side, I think, the education system is falling short because the profession is evolving and changing, so we're still teaching the way we were a long time ago. And we'll put that to one side, but the function of we see, and I saw with many of my students, a desire to think about how, if you like, community voice was embedded in the brief. But I think, again, in the UK, we spend a lot of time in a lot of schools with design studios where students are asked to write and make the briefs up. Now, at one level, there's something really nice and esoteric about that, but actually it's not a reflection of the real world. So I think in those contexts where young people are, the young students or new students of architecture are keen to think about how a project might be embedded in a community, they're creating that in a sort of a vacuum, and those, I think, you'd be slightly careful also when they make those projects live with a community that they're being true in the way that we are with them. So that's not answering that point particularly, but I think I would say to Fee's point as well, we are not short of any architect that we come across wanting to get involved in this work and seeing the value of it. I think architects in the UK, and I'm sure here, are often still the people that are holding the kind of care in that space, in that room, about the communities, the projects they're serving. They're the ones worrying about that in that room. It's not the project manager worrying about the end user in the same way that the architect is. And I think the architect has to fight quite hard in the next kind of decade to hold that. And I think that care thing needs to be brought into the front and centre of an education. And because they're the custodians, really, they're the last bastion of holding the custodianship for society, for the communities they're serving. They're the last people holding that torch, I think. And so I think if I was to think about how that curriculum was shifted, it would be shifted about how we champion that care and bring that care maybe into the centre of the conversation, or every conversation of a new development, and that would maybe root it in a more practical way. I would say it's also really depressing that, like, our institute in the UK, the RBA, feeds up an amazing learning programme with an incredible, a series of ambassadors working with architects throughout the country doing amazing work, and that over time has been cut, and it exists still now, but those sort of networks exist in professional bodies throughout the UK, and they are amazing. Kind of those things are quite easy to set up. There are thousands of architects who want to do this, but they need the confidence and some of the skilling, because they're not necessarily educators themselves, but they want to go into schools, they want to do that work, they want to bring those communities into their projects. They need the confidence to do that. And actually, the RBA has that template. It's sadly unable through its subscription or its model or its finance, or it's chosen not to pursue that. It's at the centre of what it does, and it could do. I don't know. I can't talk to this country. Maybe you can talk more to that.
I think that it's a nice point to finish on the care, because I think everything you all talked about comes back to that caring and a sense of responsibility, and I think care is even more, responsibility sounds almost a bit scary, but to care is really to be involved. And on that note, I would like to really, because we ran out of time, thank you all for being really involved in this conversation. And I hope that our audience and those of you joining online as well are taking away really interesting points from this conversation about the impact young people can have in projects when they are involved early on, and the need to really care and involve young people and children early on in these conversations in making a difference, because there's a window, as Venus said, and when we miss that, it can lead to apathy or cynicism. And I think you've shown beautiful examples where actually you can activate that agency, and we're also proud of our program, Tuba Youth and the City for Children, that we are running, and the outreach that we are doing. So a big applause for our guests tonight, Venus Jahanpour, Brilliant Stars, Zuzana Žurkinová, Metropolitan Institute, Matt and Fiona, London, Matt and Fiona. Sorry, I keep on calling you Matt and Fiona, but honestly, Fiona McDonald and Matthew Springett, that's it. But you've got your beautiful beans as well, so a big round of applause for all of you. Audience, and that's a wrap. We start with Children mini-series before the summer, but follow us on tuba.nrb.sk for more programming. And we mentioned Tuba Youth a lot, and they've got lots of activities coming up even this month, and join us for anything that's coming up. So thanks again, and enjoy the evening. Bye-bye.